Okay, so we can begin the public hearing. I declare open this public hearing of the Joint Committee of the National Broadband Network. Before calling the first witnesses, I ask a committee member to move that the media be allowed to film the proceedings today in accordance with the rules set down for committees, which include not taking footage or still images of members' papers or laptop screens. Thank you, Senator Cameron. The hearing today intends to examine the performance information on the rollout from the government that was received on the 23rd of September. This information is now available on the committee's website. In future, it is the intention of the committee to release this information once it is circulated to committee members. I'd like to thank NBN Co and the departments relevant on behalf of the committee for this information. At our first meeting in May, when we discussed this, we agreed that the committee would work on the material and let NBN Co and the departments know if the information is adequate or presented in a usable fashion. So this will be an ongoing discussion we will have with you and which we can test for the first time this morning. Please bear with committee members who may be called away due to the proceedings in the Senate or the House. There is a fair bit going on a fair few topics in both chambers. We hope not to have too much disruption this morning, but in some regards that's beyond committee members' control. So I now welcome the witnesses before us. For the Hansard record, could you please state your names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? And do you mind, could we close these doors too? There's a fair bit of interruption. Thanks. Sorry, if you could, for the Hansard record, could you please state your names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Mike Quigley, CEO of NBN.
Jane Mason, Deputy Secretary, Department of Finance and Deregulation.
Stacey Hall, Acting First Assistant Secretary, Department of Finance and Deregulation.
Philip Smith, Assistant Secretary, NBN Policy and Shareholder Branch, Department of Finance and Deregulation.
Darryl Quinlivan, Deputy Secretary, Department of Broadband, Communications and the Digital Economy.
Pip Spence, First Assistant Secretary of the NBN Implementation Division, CBCDE.
Danny McCarthy, Assistant Secretary, NBNI Implementation Division, DBCDE.
Okay, thank you all for coming in. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I advise you that these hearings are formal proceedings of the Parliament and warrant the same respect as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Mr Quigley and Mr Quinlivan, would you like to make, well, or would anyone like to make an opening statement to the committee? Okay, Mr Quigley.
Thank you, Chair. When I was here 3 weeks ago, I gave an update on our progress, and just in fact in that 3 weeks quite a lot's happened, which I guess is an indication of how things are moving relatively rapidly at the moment. Perhaps just to help with the opening statement briefing this morning, I've circulated 5 slides to you, which you should have in front of you. And the first one just relates to progress. That's a slide labelled Update on Progress. And
sorry, can I just cut in? Does anyone not have those in front of them? Okay, so if Ms Rowland could get them. Yep. Sorry to interrupt.
Want me to continue? Yep. Okay, so that first slide gives you an idea of the things that NBN Co is undertaking at the moment. Up on the top left-hand side, you can see all of the second release sites that we have now announced preliminary construction dates for. Just below that is the new developments. We're now working on some 90 new developments around Australia. You may recall that the government set a policy for NBN Co at the beginning of this year for any site, new development site that has above 100 premises over a 3-year period. Our job is to make sure that they are provided with fibre at a wholesale level, and we are doing that around the country. We have in fact some roughly 60 active services as of today on those new developments, and that's, as you would expect, growing reasonably quickly. On the mainland first release sites and in Tasmania together, we've now got about 1,400 active services. That's growing day by day. Up in the top right-hand side, you can see the 5 fixed wireless satellite first release sites that we have announced: Tamworth, Ballarat, Toowoomba, Darwin and Geraldton. The orange piece in the centre of each of those little maps is the fibre footprint, and the dark blue that surrounds it is the wireless footprint. So you can see what we call largely a donut effect. In other words, you have in the centres of town and where there's a reasonable population density, you put fibre, and then around that you put fixed wireless. On the bottom is the indication of the interim satellite service that we launched in July 1st of this year, and that is a replacement for the Australian Broadband Guarantee. We have now a bit over 800 services on that, and the reports we're getting back from the folks who are on that service are very positive. They're using over satellite things that's been very difficult for them to do up until now. So, as you also know, I think, as of the end of the month, the last month, September, we had over 14,000 residents and businesses that we passed with fibre on the mainland. They are all now able to order a service, a commercial service, because we started from the 1st of October offering commercial services. And we have seen retail service providers releasing their broadband and telephone pricing plans. There's quite a number of different plans in the marketplace now. There's 6 RSPs who have released their plans, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. The reason we're back here today, on this day, is of course that you didn't receive the information that you required, and I think it was clear to me that the committee was not too happy with that, with the exception of Senator Cameron. And as I said at the last hearing, this was not a consequence of something that NBN Co did. NBN Co provided all the information that was required of it well in advance of the previous hearing. I just want to make sure the record is clear on that. And I'd also like to make clear that we're more than happy to provide whatever information we can, and frankly we welcome the scrutiny of this and other committees. In fact, I'll be making myself available to committee hearings 4 times in 5 weeks. And that is a good opportunity to go into some depth on a number of the issues that have been raised and hopefully provide some clarity on them. I'd like, if I could now, just to take up a couple of points from the last hearing. On September 20th, there was some discussion around our special access undertaking, our undertaking discussion paper. Specifically, we talked about the fact that the CPI plus 5% was not NBN Co's long-term pricing intention. In fact, in that discussion paper, NBN commits to keeping price increases on the basic and most popular access products to half of the increase in CPI each year. The CPI plus 5% is simply what is not uncommon you have in such documents, a price shock mechanism. It's an upper limit or a cap on any individual price variation. So I want to be absolutely clear, is our intention in NBN Co to keep driving wholesale prices down. I think if anybody who says that we want to increase prices by 5% is simply misleading both the committee and the public. As I said at that time, it is our clearly stated intention in our corporate plan that our intention is to reduce prices over time. Mr Fletcher also asked a question. In fact, it was a very good question that he asked, which I followed up on, and I'm able to provide a bit more detail today. It was in relation to voice-only services and entry-level pricing. Mr Fletcher made the point that Telstra currently offers a basic service at $22.95 per month. I want to state that anyone in Australia who currently accesses fixed voice line services will continue to be able to do so. Customers in areas that we serve by the NBN fibre network will continue to have access to voice-only services over a Telstra copper line up until the NBN fibre service is rolled out in their area. After the NBN fibre is rolled out, the agreement with Telstra means that they will be able to access a voice-only service over this new infrastructure. Perhaps for Mr Fletcher's benefit, I've just mentioned that I was addressing Mr Fletcher the question that you asked in the last meeting, which was a good question about the basic telephone service. Customers in areas that will be able to receive high-speed broadband services over the NBN wireless and satellite network will continue to have access to fixed-line voice services over a Telstra copper line. This is the arrangement where, in that last notionally 10%, the copper service will remain. The prices at which Telstra can offer these services remain subject to the Telstra-specific retail price controls. Telstra's carrier licence conditions requires it to offer low-income packages for access to a fixed-line telephone service, and the Low Income Measures Assessment Committee, that's LIMAC, plays an ongoing role in working with Telstra in relation to the low-income product it offers. I said at the last hearing that NBN Co had come to a commercial arrangement with Telstra to ensure that those people who are on special services can continue to have those special services provided to them at no increased cost on the fibre network. When it comes to providers other than Telstra, I understand there is no obligation upon them to provide discounted services to people on low incomes. This obligation remains solely with Telstra. Since our last discussion, it's interesting to see that Primus Telecom have released a voice-only product at $24.95 per month, and that's obviously on the fibre network. So while there may not be RSPs other than Telstra offering services to those who qualify for low-income assistance, there will still be voice-only options at reasonable rates. In fact, the investigation and analysis that we've done concluded that the basic NBN Co offering provides RSPs with a capability of providing voice-only services that are roughly equivalent to today's offering over copper, with an equivalent input cost. So we've detailed all this in a response to your question, Mr Fletcher. Also in the last hearing, the committee was interested in how the company was ensuring that people in communities across Australia were fully informed of how the NBN would affect them and what they would need to do. There are a number of ways in which the NBN Co is engaging with many stakeholders. First, we're focusing on community engagement activities around the rollout of the network. We're committed to providing communications and stakeholder engagement activities, particularly for each what we call fibre serving area module, which is about roughly 3,000 premises. We'll do that prior to and during the physical rollout. We also make information available through regularly updated websites, media announcements, community-run forums, ongoing liaison with key stakeholders and speaking engagements. We also run a solutions centre and a 1800 number to answer people's questions. We also engage in communications with industry groups, community groups, state and local governments. For example, earlier this month, representatives from our stakeholder engagement team and our satellite and wireless areas attended a Royal Flying Doctors CEO conference, where they were able to give an overview of the project and explain in detail the capabilities of the satellite and wireless products and what it would mean for their organisations. As I mentioned last time, we are planning comprehensive nationwide information activities to make people aware of exactly what they have to do when the NBN comes to town. We're still working through the details of the public information migration activities with the government and with industry. If I can turn back now perhaps to the slides, and you can see a slide there labelled NBN Co Product Release 1. I just wanted to draw your attention to the progress we're making with access seekers. On the slide here it says some 27 access seekers have signed the fibre access agreement with NBN Co. I believe actually the number is now 30 or 31 as of today. We have 12 successfully onboarded and we have 11 more scheduled to onboarding. That's the process where their systems and NBN Co systems can intermesh and the two systems can talk to each other. We've seen some innovative bundling of services already happening. 12 megabit down, 1 megabit up pricing from $34.50 and 100 megabit pricing from $49.50. As I mentioned, 6 providers have released pricing, and that's only 2 months after our mainland launch. So we have about 100 retail price plans in the market now. What is also particularly interesting is 4 previous satellite-only retail providers are now offering fibre product service as well. They've come to the conclusion that whereas before they were only addressing satellite, now it's so easy for them to also access our fibre footprint that they can offer both. And that was in fact the intention, to make it easy for a retail service provider to access any premise in the catchment area of that point of interconnect, irrespective of what the technology was being used, whether it was satellite, fibre or fixed wireless. I'd also like to point out the next slide, slide 3. We did a comparison, since there is a lot of interest with retail prices in the marketplace for NBN fibre service compared to ADSL 2+, and whereas a year ago we could only speculate, now we have reality. We now have 6 RSPs, and that picture that you can see in front of you, the band there, the shaded band, gives you the range of ADSL 2+ prices. The dollars are along the vertical axis, and along the horizontal axis these are the various download plans that are offered by service providers. So in the band is all of the bottom of the band is the minimum ADSL pricing, the top of the band is the maximum ADSL pricing for those various downloads. Remembering ADSL 2+ gives you 20 megabits if you happen to be right next to the exchange, but on average across the nation you're likely to get 10 megabits per second or around that types of speeds on average, and obviously uploads considerably less than that. What you can see in all the dots is all the different prices for the 12.1 service in the NBN platform now, which is for 12 megabit service down and 1 megabit service up. And if you will also remember that the ADSL 2+ service serves a percentage of the country, 60 or 70%. What we're talking about here is 93% of the country being reached with the fibre service. What I think is even more good news is if you look at the next slide, which is the 25 megabits down, 5 megabits up. So our prices for this service are also reasonably comparable to ADSL 2 service, but of course a 25 meg down and a 5 megabit up service is far superior to anything you can get on an ADSL 2+ service today. You also recall, as I've said, the 25 megabit down, 5 megabit up is the service at layer 2 that we provide, irrespective of distance. So that, I think, is good news on those retail pricing that we're seeing, and we haven't yet seen prices from either Optus or Telstra, who we're likely to see those within the next short period, I believe. What we've also seen is in fact, the first retail supplier into the market has lowered their prices from that time. In the period of only a month or two, when they saw competition at the retail level, they have dropped their prices. And we expect to see more of that happening. Last item I'd like to mention is on slide 5. And I think there's a very important message in that, and it's one that I think confirms what we've been talking about for the best part of 18 months now. These slides are they're recent slides from the Australian Bureau of Statistics information from June. What the left-hand slide shows you is what we all know, is that the number of mobile subscribers in Australia is climbing, is continuing to climb. And the number of, we're talking about here, mobile broadband subscribers, the number of fixed broadband subscribers is also going up, but obviously at a much slower rate. A much, much slower rate. And that's what we know and it's what we expected. The picture on the right-hand side shows something quite different. And this picture on the right-hand side is consistent with what's being seen around the world, which is when you look at the average amount of downloads per month on the fixed line network and on the mobile network, you will see that on the fixed line network, the average downloads per month in gigabytes has doubled in the last 12 months. And on the mobile network, for the average downloads for a broadband subscriber, it's dropped by 20%. That is a trend we expect to continue to keep going. In fact, I was speaking to the folks from Ericsson just the other day, and they told me their prediction for 2016 is if they look at total worldwide broadband data downloads, they expected the amount of traffic on mobile broadband to be 0.5% of the fixed line networks by 2016. By 2016, 0.5%. Now, what that says, I think, is what we all expect. We expect the number of connected devices to keep going up very rapidly. And in fact, in our first release sites, we've measured the number of connected devices to be 5 on average. Cisco are predicting that to be close to 7 or 8 on a worldwide basis by 2020. So expect the number of devices to go up, but the heavy lifting of applications other than voice is going to be done on fibre-based networks. We're seeing that same message coming from France Telecom, from operators in Shaw. Juniper, I think, research just recently estimated that there would be a 7-fold increase in the cost of just trying to keep up with the basic data that's being downloaded on wireless. Increasingly, we're seeing a situation in which iPads do not have a 3G interface. They're being used on Wi-Fi. They're portable devices, mobile devices, but they're used on Wi-Fi when they're in the home, in the office, in airports. Only under exceptional circumstances is traffic being downloaded over the 3G network. This, in fact, is something that the operators recognise, they're planning for. They're struggling even to keep up mobile networks at that relatively modest data growth, total data growth, because the number of devices is going up, average going down, but the total bytes or gigabytes is still climbing on mobile networks, but obviously not as fast. There's only 2 things you can do. You can get more spectrum, or you can build more cell sites. Building more cell sites is becoming increasingly difficult in many parts of the world. So I thought that would be a useful summary. In conclusion, what I'd like to say is that next week we'll be releasing our 12-month rollout schedule, and that will then begin to show people everything that we're starting in the next 12 months, give people an idea. And early next year, we hope to then extend that out to a 3-year indicative rollout schedule. We're continuing to work with the ACCC, meeting with them regularly on our special access undertaking. And we have now completed 4 rounds of public consultation on our wholesale broadband agreement. We are engaging with industry, and we're taking on feedback and trying to get the best possible outcomes we could. I'd also like to thank some of the committee members for the issues that you did raise last time round. Mr Fletcher on voice-only customers, Senator Xenophon and Senator Ludlam for their questions on regional communities. And in fact, we have just lodged, I think this morning, a comprehensive answer to the question on that you raised on satellite services. So there's a little paper we wrote on that, and we'd be delighted to continue to supply the committee with such papers in response to your questions as fast as we can. And I believe we've answered, we've lodged all the answers to the questions you raised last time.
Yes, I think we got a bundle of questions on notice today, so thank you for that. Do Ms Mason or Mr Quinlivan want to do an opening statement at all? You're both okay? Just want to clarify that what you've given us as far as the update is a public document that we can... Sure. I know there's some media here, and also whether we can put this on our website.
Absolutely.
As well. Great.
And we might as well do the questions on notice at the same time. So
yep, and so questions and notice obviously the same. So questions from the committee. I'll just tick through some of the issues that have been in the media recently and give you all 3 relevant bodies the opportunity to respond. The first is some comments in regards the NBN rollout being several months behind, which over the last week has received a fair bit of coverage. Whether you want to provide or take the opportunity to put on the record any further details or any further comments in that regard?
Yes, certainly there's been a number of factors which have caused us to have to shift our timeframes from what we put in our corporate plan of December last year. There's the impact of the points of interconnect decision, the decision by the ACCC to move from 14 points of interconnect that we'd recommended to 121. We had to take that on board, and that was quite a significant change. As I mentioned before, from January the 1st of this year, we had an obligation to provide fibre services to greenfields. That was quite an undertaking to make sure that we could do that, and we had to divert quite some resources and quite some effort into making sure we could comply with that requirement, which we did. And we're now, as I said, turning on services. The Telstra deal took a little longer than we thought. It was quite complex, and we still yet to have the deal ratified by Telstra shareholders. The vote, I think, happens on October 18th, and of course we have also to have the SSU approved by the ACCC, and that time frame I certainly couldn't predict. And as I've said, I think to the committee before, I did suspend the construction contracts because I wasn't convinced we were getting the right outcome from the Australian public for taxpayers' money, and so I suspended those, went into a new process. That did, in fact, delay us by some months as well. So the combined effect of that has caused a delay, which we will reflect in our next corporate plan, which we'll submit to the government in due course.
So the question, is it a loss several months or is it recoverable?
We have not changed our end date for the program. Now, of course, that means we have to work a little harder towards the back end of that, but my experience in large projects has been that they often take a little longer to get going, even with the very best intentions. And once they get going, you find you can increase the speeds as you move along. But having said that, I wouldn't underestimate the magnitude of this task. It is a big job.
Yep. The other issue that has been floating around in the past week is some comments from The Economist magazine in regards the Australian NBN program, whether you wanted to take the opportunity, any of the three of you, to respond to some of the comments.
Well, perhaps I could start. I've only briefly glanced at the report, but it seemed to me it was great news on the surface of it. According to the report, I can save a tremendous amount of capex because I only have to pass 7.5 million homes. I thought I had to do 13 million, but they believed it's 7.5. So I frankly didn't get much further than that.
All right. Did you want to?
I think the Minister's got quite a few comments on the record already about the report, so I don't think we've got anything to add to those.
Anything that you want to put on the record while you got the chance in regards shareholder meeting, Telstra, all on track? Any comments that the committee needs to be aware of?
Well, as Mr Quigley's mentioned, the Telstra shareholder vote is scheduled for next week, so that's crucial, obviously, in consummating the Telstra deal, and Telstra and the ACCC are working hard on the SSU, so we're looking forward to a speedy conclusion of all those processes after the Telstra vote.
Okay. And as far as media commentary and the opportunity to respond, there was an article in The Age of the 22nd of September that identified some issues of financial control within the department. Whether you want to take the opportunity to respond to those issues?
That might be best left to Senate estimates next week, Chair. It does not bear at all on the NBN project as a whole or within the department for that matter.
Okay. The way the article read, that it certainly implied that it did have a relation, but you're suggesting it doesn't?
No, and we will not agree with the thrust of that article. You'll not be surprised to hear.
And we'll deal with that next week.
Next week, yeah.
Okay. The only other issue I have is in regards to procurement. The committee's been starting to do some work in the area of procurement, and just receiving a bit of evidence that suggests that there may have been some substantial change of direction in regards procurement policy. Does particularly Mr Quigley, want to provide any advice in regards how procurement policy has developed in the life of this project, and whether there have been any substantial changes of direction at all along the way that an oversight committee such as us should be aware of?
I don't believe our policy has changed. We wrote a procurement policy up quite early on and have stuck to that. We have in fact used probity advisors in some particularly sensitive areas just to get another, since for contracts we're talking about large sums of money. Certainly it's a case that some directions have changed. As I mentioned on the construction contracts, we suspended a process and started a new one, so it's quite clearly there been a change of direction. Have there been any other substantial changes? No, there's always been negotiations that have gone on. As you would expect, those people who are not successful in tenders would have preferred a different outcome. That's life. I've been on the other end of that many times, so that's the way things are. I can't think of anything in which we have made substantial changes. We've certainly made some corrections as we've learnt, or adjustments as we've learnt of information as we've gone through a tender process, but in each one of those we've followed the policy. And we're very careful in the way we document our decisions in procurement activities.
Okay, and then the final questions from me before handing to colleagues is, in regards to the information we've been provided on was it the 22nd or the 23rd of September, as far as performance reporting, just as far as the relationship, I just want to be really clear, particularly as chair of this committee, how both NBN Co and the department see KPIs or benchmarks and the information that NBN Co is providing to the department is the same as the information being provided to ministers and government and to this committee, and if not, where are those points of difference that we need to be aware of and potentially work on? I just want to clarify exactly who is establishing benchmarks and how that information is being screened along the way before it actually reaches us as an oversight committee.
Okay, well, two separate points there. On the performance benchmarks, there was a presentation to this committee in June, I think. I wasn't there, I wasn't present personally, but I understand there was a discussion about a proposal from Commonwealth officials then about what might be included in the report, and so that's been the base for this report and for subsequent reports. And as the note to the KPI says, the material will become more meaningful as it's added to and developed over time. If there are areas in which the committee would like reporting, you're very free, of course, to ask the government for reports on those, and the minister would consider those, I'm sure. So this is a start rather than
you answered my obvious next question.
The steady state reporting set of reporting arrangements. On the content that you've been provided, so the company provided a quarterly report to the government as shareholder. And the government considered that and has deleted some material that would not normally be provided publicly and wasn't provided in the corporate plan that was released last December. So that's commercially sensitive material about risks that the company is facing and some forward-looking material. Because of the passage of time, there was, as you've noted, a month between the arrival of the report and its provision to the committee. There was also some additional material added to pick up developments over that period. So that explains almost all the changes that were made.
Okay, so we're going to walk from, just trying to establish the boundaries in a spirit of openness between all the relevant parties. There is going to be a clear boundary that will be a determination by the department on commercial in confidence. It's not necessarily a determination of NBN Co. No. It's a determination of the department.
Well, by the government. It's a report to the government, and then the government.
And just so I'm clear, how do you define government? The executive?
The executive, yes.
Okay. Ms. Rollout.
Thanks, Mr Chairman. Thanks, Mr Quigley. Firstly, I would note that the issue of the 3-month delay is not new news. I mean, the Minister's been talking about that since April, so I just wanted to make that first comment. The other comments that I'd like to make and questions, I actually have some very practical questions regarding the second release site in Riverstone, which is the area where I represent, and I can understand that some of these you mightn't be able to answer straight away, but if you could take them away so I have accuracy for the record, that would be great. So I represent an area in West and North West Sydney, which I don't need to tell anyone else here, is they're not asking why are we getting the NBN. They want to know when it's coming, and they wanted it yesterday. So the Riverstone second release site, construction has been announced for commencement next month. Mm-hmm. Can you confirm we're on target for that, or has that been affected by the delay?
No, I believe that all the dates we set last month should be right. But we will be releasing next week, in fact, some further details for everything we're doing for the next 12 months, everything we're commencing over the next 12 months. Riverstone will be absolutely in there, and the dates will be confirmed.
Will that include the footprint, Mr Quigley?
No, the issue we have is we can't establish precisely the footprint down to an individual premise until you actually do what's called the network design document. You produce it. What you do at the very front end of the process, you have to do a design document that goes street by street, premise by premise, so you can draw that boundary. What we can give is indications, which is what we will be giving. But you don't, until you're really 12 months from turning on service on average, you don't lock down precisely the boundary at a premise level.
Understood. My other question relates to the fibre in Greenfields Estates legislation and the impact of that. One of the new estates that I have is a suburb called the Ponds, which continues to develop in separate release phases.
Yes.
I would like to know, if you need to take it on notice, which aspects of those developments are now affected by the fibre mandate and which ones are not?
If there's an area, and I believe I'm reasonably familiar with Ponds, if it's an area that over 3 years is going to have more than 100 premises, then we have an obligation to provide fibre services. So the developer provides duct as they're laying, the utilities. They provide duct for us. We will then provide fibre to that, so that fibre services are available when premises are then occupied. So even if it's done in tranches, we will be making sure that fibre services are available in each of those tranches.
Right.
And many of the developments we're doing are in tranches over a period of time.
Okay. The problem I have is that the Ponds is adjacent to and is separated by one road, basically, the suburb of Kellyville Ridge, the existing suburb. Kellyville Ridge has not been served by fibre. The majority of it has not been served by fibre, and it's an area where I continually, the biggest complaint I get in that area is access to high-speed broadband services. Now, earlier in the year, Telstra announced an upgrade of the Kellyville exchange to be able to service a limited number of residences, and they were actually able to give me the map, and I was able to take that back to residents, because previously, as you'd understand, people would only be able to get a connection if someone actually moved out of the suburb, because there was such a lack of capacity in the exchange to keep up with the demand. What I would particularly like to know when the design phase, as soon as design phase is known, is the timings for that. And the reason for that is Telstra, I must say Telstra has been quite cooperative in listening to consumers' concerns and doing those upgrades. But, of course, as you appreciate, they need a business case to be able to make that extra investment.
Yes.
So it actually does impact on, I know you can't give me the footprint now, but if you can give me, when you can, some aspects of timing so that I'm able to follow that up with Telstra.
Yes, we can certainly do that.
That would be great.
Some very good local member work there. And to be fair, it is an issue across the board, but have you got further questions on the back of that?
Not on that point. I'll let other people go.
Okay. Mr Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. Mr Quigley, thank you for the information about voice-only prices, and I apologise that I missed the first part of it. I'll ask a couple of questions, and I hope you'll indulge me if the answers to some of the questions I'll ask were already contained in what you had already said. First of all, I think you said that Primus has announced a voice-only product at $24.95 a month.
I believe so.
What's Primus's market share right now? Do you know? Or?
No, I don't, off the top of my head. That's public information. I think it's produced regularly, so I don't know.
They're not a market leader in voice services?
Well, no, clearly in voice services there's somebody who absolutely dominates voice services, that's Telstra.
Okay. Primus is paying the standard wholesale price per service of $24, I presume?
We have equivalents. In fact, we have an obligation, as we have no choice but to provide equivalent services to all retail service providers at the same rate, same commercial conditions, same everything. So we cannot distinguish between retail service providers.
I understand that. So I just want to make sure I've got this right. They're paying the same $24 price as everybody else, and
yes.
they've taken a commercial decision to operate at a very low margin with a voice product. As a wholesale provider, do you turn your mind to the question of the viability of the retail business cases that retailers are
Not right at the moment. I've got enough on my mind to not worry too much about the details of the business cases, other than the fundamental work we did right up front, which is to try and look very carefully at the input costs to retail service providers and try and make sure we could come up with a business case that would come as close as we possibly could to those input costs for somebody providing, a combination of DSL and voice service. And I think what you're seeing in the retail prices that I've showed you for the 12.1 and the 25.5 is we've done a reasonable job of that. We've got prices that are comparable, which I'd have to say was not a foregone conclusion, given what we're talking about here is a brand new fibre network, which is also doing two parts that are extremely uncommercial, which is the fixed wireless and the satellite in those areas. And we're also fibring out to places that no commercial entity will do. So we're pretty happy with, I think, the retail prices that we've seen in the market.
But just to be clear, it's a matter for the retail service providers
Absolutely.
as to whether they can make a business case or not.
Absolutely, it's up to them.
Do you have a view as to whether 95 cents per customer is sufficient to cover billing?
I think if that was the only service they were selling, Mr Fletcher, they'd have a hard time. But I think they're doing what many people in business do, and I've done myself, which is you price a product on the expectation it's going to get you into the market, and then you're going to build on that.
Now, if we come to what you said about Telstra, and again, apologies if you made some of this clear before I came in. I think I heard you say that Telstra today has special arrangements for certain classes of low-income consumers.
I believe so, yes.
And that those arrangements will be maintained.
Yes. Now, this is probably a question that's better answered by the department, because TUSMA has been, if I've pronounced it correctly, TUSMA has been set up to make sure that those kind of arrangements are maintained.
I think the issue is Telstra's got specific obligations that don't apply to other carriers, and so they've got arrangements to meet those obligations, and they're, as I understand it, proposing to continue to.
And can I just understand? There's one group of customers who qualify for those arrangements. It's right, isn't it, that separately there is the home line budget line rental product, and there's no qualification required for a customer to have the benefit of that pricing. They just choose that. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Fletcher.
And that's $22.95 a month.
That's right.
Right now.
Yes.
Recently gone up, I think.
As I understand, it's $22.95 a month.
And the arrangements that Mr Quigley described, do they also guarantee the continuation of the homeline budget price?
No. I don't think they guarantee. It's, as Mr Quinlivan said, it's our understanding that Telstra is going to continue to offer the current low-income package, which includes the homeline budget.
Well, so let me just understand that. If I choose today to get the homeline budget product from Telstra, it's open to me to do that, or any Australian. There's no, or indeed any customer, regardless of nationality. There's no additional eligibility requirement. It's not a concessional
as
offering.
I understand,
it's a commercial product.
It is open to anyone to take up the service, but it's only, I think, the information I have, that there are only around 600,000 people on that service at the moment.
It's a commercial product.
Yeah, it's a commercial product.
And is it the case that Telstra will continue to offer a $22.95 a month line rental product when the NBN is operational and they no longer have their own network?
Well, I think that's a question you'd have to, at the moment, that's a question you'd have to direct to Telstra, because they've not released their product and pricing plans for the future. But as I mentioned before, and also in the last discussion here, our expectation and understanding from the discussions with Telstra is that they're not proposing any significant changes in this area. So our expectation is that there'll be a product that's roughly comparable with that one in their future pricing and product offerings. But that can't be said with complete certainty until Telstra have released those.
Do they have a regulatory obligation or a contractual commitment to continue to deliver a $22.95 a month voice line rental?
They don't have a specific requirement on that actual price. They do. The licence condition is around making sure that they've got the low income measures in place.
Okay, so if Telstra were to say, and as you rightly say, we don't know what pricing they're going to offer, but if they were to say, for argument's sake, with a $24 a month per service wholesale price, commercially we've decided that our lowest line rental product has to be higher than $24. If they were to decide that, there would be no regulatory or contractual barrier for them doing that.
There would be no regulatory or contractual barrier, but we have an understanding with Telstra as a result of the negotiations with NBN Co that that's not the situation we'll find ourselves in.
So what you're putting to us is that the government is confident there will continue to be a $22.95
or something something in that vicinity, yes.
But it's a generalised confidence from the negotiations is not based upon a specific regulatory or contractual.
Not at this stage. Not at this stage, no.
If for any reason your confidence proved not to be well founded, would the government then act to impose a regulatory obligation?
The government would, well, it's a matter of degree, I guess, and that would be a matter for the government at the time. I can't really speculate. But I think if there were to be an outcome here that was significantly at variance with its expectations, then we'd certainly carefully consider the matter, but we've got no reason to believe that's the situation we'll be in.
Okay. Can I ask Mr Quigley about the penetration experience that you provided in your report, figures as at 30th of June, showing from which a penetration figure can be derived in terms of services in operation as a percentage of homes passed. Has that performance materially changed in the last 4 months?
Yes, the numbers are climbing. I think last time I was here, I can't remember exactly what the numbers were in the last 4 months. Frankly, it was probably quite low, as you'd expect, starting up.
Sure.
As I mentioned, on the various platforms we have now, there's roughly 2,300 active subscribers, end users.
Sorry, that's on the fibre, and apologies.
On the fibre alone, I think there's probably about, if I take the 3 Tasmanian sites and the 5 mainland sites, I think, as of probably about yesterday, last week, there's about 1,500 subscribers. Now, it's just, remember, we're just exited a trial phase. Sure. Our intention at the end of September on the 5 mainland release sites was to have 400 active subscribers. We ended up with slightly above 800. And we're only just, we don't have yet Optus and Telstra who've released their plans. So we're not in a fully operational mode. You couldn't possibly draw any conclusions other than its take-up's faster than we expected.
Do you expect any penetration consequences as a result of the trial pricing being replaced with commercial pricing? We haven't. We saw what the RSPs tended to do was anticipate because when we launched the trials, we had already had our corporate plan out. We'd already announced the wholesale prices. That was with the intention that we could do it as early as possible and there would be no surprises. So when in the trial phase, RSPs were offering prices to the market. In some cases they weren't charging, in other cases they were charging. We certainly have seen no impact. The numbers haven't gone down, they've continued to rise. And thank you for the answer to the question on notice regarding the point at which
Sorry, the question on notice on what?
The answer to the question on notice regarding the point at which the Telstra network will start to be switched off. And I think you've said the disconnection regime will commence at a point in 2012. I'm interested in what NBN expects the penetration profile will be as you approach that point. Do you expect to be at 100% or close to before disconnection commences?
No, there is. The process is somewhat more complex than that. There's a set of preconditions we must meet in NBN Co before Telstra will start retiring its copper network. We've agreed that with them, which makes perfect sense. In other words, operational support systems and business support systems all have to be functioning. We've got to be able to exchange information, take orders in, and all of those background systems. What then happens is we plan the what's called a fibre serving area, made up of a number of modules called fibre serving area modules, each of which, as I mentioned, is about 3,000 premises. When we have completed a fibre serving area module, we declare that complete. In that case, Telstra will look at it and say, yes, we agree it is complete. We then start a process of migration from that point, and that process can go over 18 months. And we won't obviously be retiring any copper service, which is a special service, which there is no equivalent replacement on the fibre. And that's agreed between ourselves and Telstra. So that's the period over which that will happen. But the intention, obviously, is to bring people across onto the fibre service, and we expect the vast majority of people would be happy to do so.
Mr. Fletcher, I'm conscious there's others who want to ask questions. Have you got many?
Just let me, if I can just ask one more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that. So, what I'm interested in, I guess, is that there'll be a proportion of people who will still be taking their existing service at the time that the Telstra network is switched off. Now, that proportion may be very low, or it may be somewhat higher, and that'll presumably be the inverse of the penetration rate that is achieved on the NBN. And so what I'm interested in knowing is, do you expect that penetration rate to be rising steadily? Do you expect it to jump just in the last month or so before the disconnection date? Will it only jump after the disconnection date?
I'd expect it would, if the first release sites guide, we will see a take-up rate which will be relatively modest until we come to the point where we start the migration process, and that's the point at which you'll start to see the substantial migration taking place. Yep.
Senator Cameron.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Quinlivan. Two areas that I want to raise with you. On the issue of pricing for voice calls, I suppose other than health insurance, the telecommunications industry is one of the most complex areas for a customer to understand what value they're getting. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that personally, Senator.
You would, sorry?
I would agree with that personally, as a consumer. Yes.
So you can't just say that there's a price and then compare that with another price, because you may not be comparing apples with apples.
It needs to be done carefully, I would agree, if it's to be done fairly, Senator, yes.
Because I'm advised that Telstra, their budget calls are $22.95, as you've outlined. The calls are 30 cents plus $2 for STD up to 20 minutes. So it's not just, you've got this, that there is sort of variations to how that operates. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Primus is $24.95. They've got free local calls and free STD calls. So that's the competition kicking in the retail sector in telecommunications. Would that be right?
Yes, and Mr. Quigley might want to expand on this, but the increasing use of voice over internet protocol calling services, you would expect to lead to very significant changes in voice pricing in the future.
I think that's right. I think also, Senator, there's a clear trend. The primary voice network, I believe, in the future is going to be a mobile network. People will increasingly use mobile voice. I mean, that's the way operators are looking at it. And the primary data network, including for video and internet and all those applications, is likely to be the fibre network. But as a consequence, you can carry voice over the fibre network at relatively low cost. So we see prices, for example, for voice over IP at $10 and calls free. So I think we'll see that slow evolution take place, but you're absolutely right. You can't directly compare the $22.95 from Telstra with the $24 from Primus. They're different packages.
Yeah. And I had a briefing along with a number of other MPs and senators from Foxtel who spoke about what's happening overseas with broadband, and that goes to this issue of being able to package up, a range of products on the NBN. They will be able to provide their services through NBN, but they could also expand. So they're looking at what opportunities NBN provides them to expand their services. Is that a typical approach from companies? Have you been getting any feedback on that?
Yes, it's what we've looked at, just looking at, for example, the delivery of pay TV. Increasingly, pay TV operators, such as Foxtel, are interested in interactivity. Satellite is undoubtedly the most cost-effective way to be able to get a large number of channels into premises, in streaming those. But where customers want individual services, in other words, video on demand or those types of services, or where they want to decide what they're going to watch at what time, not select one of a large number of video channels, then an interactive network such as the NBN is what they're quite interested in using, which is why we're now working hard with the industry on developing what's called a multicast product, which allows video services to be deployed throughout the network very efficiently. So you can get what's called unicast, where you can just stream a single stream down to an end user, or you can in fact stream a combination of users the same content. So the network will have quite some capability to support and complement the networks of pay TV providers.
Thanks. Mr Quinlivan, the Chair raised with you the issue of differentiated reporting to the Board and this committee. I've always had a concern that some might have a view that this committee is a shadow board for the company, but we have got a resolution of appointment that is restricted compared to the obligations of a board. Would that be correct?
Senator, I might just distinguish there between the reports that the management of the company provide to their board, which I have no specific knowledge of, from the report that they provide to their shareholders. And so that's the government in this case, and that's the report that we received from the company as a whole, endorsed by the board, and then the material that the government's then provided to the committee is different again, as I described earlier. So in each of those cases, the board, the shareholders, and then the shareholders and the company providing a product in the interests of public accountability are all serving different governance purposes and have a different character for that reason.
You see, the resolution of appointment is about the rollout.
Yes.
The rollout is the major part of the work of NBN at the moment. I accept that, but that will be a diminishing part. Will go on for a long period of time, but will be diminishing over a period of time. And a board would receive much broader information than simply the rollout. Wouldn't that be the case?
Board and shareholders.
Board
yes.
and the shareholders.
Yes.
So our remit, if you like, our resolution of appointment is on the rollout, and that's what would be expected to be the report, not on the full gamut of the operation of NBN. Is that correct?
That's correct, but I think the government's been keen to provide as much information as it reasonably can to the public and to this committee, and And that was the objective behind the release of the corporate plan last December, which was quite an unusual thing to do. I don't think corporate plans for GBEs had been released publicly previously, so it was an unusual event in the interests of, or recognising the high level of public interest in this project, and so I think the reporting to this committee will reflect that in part as well.
Yeah. But the committee has got defined areas of operation. There's been some meandering, let me say, from time to time for various reasons, and I'm pretty keen to have an as open a book as possible. But I've always been worried that Mr. Quinlivan, Mr. Quigley has just indicated he's appearing 4 times at committees in 5 weeks. He'll be appearing before my committee and Senate estimates. There has to come a time when Mr. Quigley's got to get on with running the business and not reporting, isn't it?
I think the government's very happy with the way Mr. Quigley's running the company, Senator, and
that's not what I've asked you.
and is also very keen on the public accountability and transparency that is currently happening. But if that got to be an operational problem for Mr. Quigley and the company, I'm sure he'd make it known to the minister, who would then have a judgment to make about what was appropriate.
But it's a fairly unique situation. I don't even know any of the other companies such as Telstra or Australian Post. They don't report to the extent that we have here, do they?
There is a very high level of public interest in this project.
I'm not saying that. I support that. That's fine. But I just want to indicate I think there are limitations in terms of the public interest, in terms of how wide we range as a committee. That's all. So.
Okay, I'll take that as a comment. Senator Ludlam.
Do you know?
Well, Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is probably a question more appropriate for Mr. Quinlivan, because it's really a policy issue. I was recently visiting with Deutsche Telekom and BT and the relevant regulators and government officials in both those countries, in Germany and Britain. And the broadband upgrades in both countries are in a policy environment where facilities-based competition is being actively encouraged. And that is a key objective of government policy, which of course is not the case here. But in particular, BT are undertaking a fibre to the cabinet rollout, which will have 2/3 of the country with 80 megabits down and 20 megs up capacity by 2015, or indeed probably a bit earlier than that, and then with the balance up to about 92% with similar connectivity, but enabled by a government subsidy of £534 million, the first part of it being done by BT itself. Now, the reason they're undertaking that, obviously, and Mr. Quigley and I have discussed this before, is that this VDSL solution, fibre to the node, fibre to the cabinet, is obviously a lot cheaper. The analysis Mason estimate is it's about between a third and a quarter the cost of fibre to the premises. Given that very high speed that can be delivered and is being delivered on this VDSL fibre to the cabinet approach in Britain, and the Germans are doing something very similar, has the government thought about recalibrating the approach of the NBN? Because the experience everywhere is that customers are very reluctant to pay for the high speeds. I mean, in Germany, they told me 40% of the country has access to 40 to 50 megs on VDSL, but only 3% will actually pay for anything above the basic 16 meg, entry-level tier. And, similar problems elsewhere. So given that you can deliver 80 megs at a much lower cost than fibre to the premises, has the government considered, in the light of these developments in other comparable countries, taking that different approach?
I think the Minister and Prime Minister have made it clear over the last 2 years that they fully considered all the options that were available to them before making the decision in April 2009. And since that time, it's been implementing that decision as we're discussing today.
So there's been no sort of reconsideration, is what you're saying to me?
No reconsideration of the basic policy parameters, no.
Sorry, if I could add,
sure.
Just one item there. I've also had discussions with France Telecom and Deutsche Telekom, as well as a few others. It's very important when comparing the costs of fibre to the prem and fibre to the node or fibre to the cabinet, whatever you want to call it, when we talk about the relative costs, about who is doing that. If it's the incumbent who has access to the copper, it's a different story. It's a different comparison. It's also very important to really understand the demographics, population distribution, and also the state of the copper. What grade of wire is used, how many simple things such as whether or not in most premises the telco ran 2 copper pairs. Because if they've used 2 copper pairs, then you can use techniques such as phantoming to get much higher speeds. In Australia, to get the sorts of speeds that you're talking about, you would have to go very, very close to the premise. You would end up with an enormous number of cabinets. And it is simply not a smart commercial proposition, I think, for a country like Australia to get the sort of coverage that the government was aiming at. And also in the same company you quoted, Analysis Mason, I think, has said that the long-term architecture that most telcos aspire to and will end up with is fibre to the premise. And if you deploy a fibre to the node network, you're likely to waste about half of that investment you made in so deploying. It's interesting to see with Deutsche Telekom. In fact, I worked with them when they first started deploying VDSL, and they are now starting to replace a lot of that with fibre to the prem.
Can I just say this is we're not going to resolve this here, but I appreciate we're having this is a big issue, right? And we're having an important discussion about it. You've said regularly that if you do an upgrade to VDSL, fibre to the cabinet, and you were then subsequently to want to go fibre to the premises, you would waste, I think you just said, half of the initial...
That's Analysis Mason's figure.
Yeah, I have to say that in New Zealand, where they are doing exactly that, the advice I've had from the relevant executives at Telecom New Zealand is that is simply not true.
Well,
I put that proposition to them directly, and it was flatly contradicted by the relevant executives at Telecom New Zealand, and also by the officials, by Mr Quinlivan's equivalents in the New Zealand government. So they just said that is simply not true.
Okay, then Analysis Mason has it, in that case, has it wrong. And what I'd also say,
the only point, yeah. I'm a simple soul, simply trying to find out the truth. and the fact is, they are actually. I mean, you made that point to me, and I took it on board, and I went to a company and a country where they are doing exactly that, because they did an FTTC upgrade in New Zealand, as you know, and then they're now doing fibre to the prem for much of the country. And they said, no, that's just dead wrong.
Okay, so perhaps if I can put it this way, keep it simple.
Yeah.
When you deploy a fibre to the node network, what you're putting out is a large cabinet with active electronics in it. In other words, you're putting devices in there which drive a copper network. So you've got what are called DSLAMs, digital subscriber line access multiplexes, which have VDSL cards in them. You've got to provide power to that cabinet.
Yeah.
You've got to provide battery backup. The cabinet's got to be environmentally controlled. All of those cabinets, when you switch to fibre to the premise, are removed. And what's more, you supply a fibre to that cabinet, which then uses the tail of copper. When you do fibre to the premise, you have to replace the fibre cabinet with a splitter, which is absolutely active, different type of cabinet, and then you've got to run fibre to each premise from the splitter. So on common sense would tell you the overlap between those two technologies is very small.
Yeah, if I can...
Well, I can only... my feedback has been from people that are actually doing it, Mr. Quigley. But anyway, listen, let's not argue about it, because there's another thing I want to go to.
Just before we go, if I could, Mr. Turnbull, I think it's a very important discussion to have. It's a very important point that the committee understands. I would be delighted to spend half a day with you and take you through that analysis if you would like to do so.
Well, I think what
this is such an important issue. I think it's worth the investment in time to put your mind at rest.
I think what we should do is see if the committee can get the executives from New Zealand to talk to us, because they're actually doing. They are actually there doing it. So it's not a theoretical, suppositious, consultant type of issue.
Hang on.
But anyway,
hang on. Can I just answer that, Mr. Turnbull? Because we are, as a committee, arranging some conversations with New Zealand, and we may, with some further committee deliberations, take up the very kind offer from Mr. Quigley to give us more time.
On this specific point, in the Australian context, the ACCC provided an opinion which was along the lines that Mr. Quigley's described, which was quite important in the government's decision-making process. And I've heard Mr. Willett, a commissioner at the ACCC, make the same point in public presentations and so on. So you may wish to get an opinion from him on the issue as well. They've obviously done this analysis as well.
All right, appreciate that. Have you got more questions, Mr. Turnbull? Hang on.
Obviously, we were called out on this. I was interested in the New Zealand gaffe by Mr. Turnbull. So I'm just. So what is the context of this discussion, so we are aware?
Well, sorry, you're asking me.
I'll answer. It's a comparison of jurisdictions and the models in regards how fibre to the premises or other alternatives are rolled out. And so it's a broader policy question, and I think it's been resolved. So, Mr. Turnbull, if you'd like to move on to...
If I could just say, so Mr. Quigley, your contention is it that, notwithstanding that other comparable developed countries are upgrading services, broadband services with fibre to the cabinet rollouts, and notwithstanding that they can deliver 80 megs and are delivering that, that nonetheless it is more cost effective to do fibre to the premises in Australia?
It all depends on the objectives you're trying to meet, Mr. Turnbull. What I'd first of all say is there are countries doing fibre to the node, and I was involved in some fibre to the node rollouts. I was involved both in the US quite some years ago, both fibre to the node with AT&T and fibre to the premise with Verizon. I was involved with the fibre to the node rollout with Deutsche Telekom, but what we're seeing is increasingly those companies who started with fibre to the node, and by the way, it was perfectly logical for a incumbent telco who they own the copper to do a fibre to the node, but even those who did sometimes took an option to go to fibre to the premise. Increasingly, companies are going to fibre to the premise. But it is very important to take into account what technology is capable of delivering and what the plant is that you actually have to deal with. And Australia is a little bit unique in terms of what plant has been deployed, and you can't really compare us, for example, with Germany. The demographics are quite different. The analysis we do that says if you want to provide reasonably high speeds, some of the techniques that that allow you to get to 80 megabits, such as phantoming and vectoring and DSM, these are just very, very difficult to apply in Australia. You would need a huge number of cabinets to get anything like those speeds. And to take, whereas you can with fibre to the premise, you can cover 90% of the country. You just can't do that. You'd have to stop at somewhere, I think, around 60, 65% with a fibre to the node to get a reasonable, let's say, 12 megabits and above. And Telstra actually did this analysis some time ago. Can go look up. The question is, what do you do from there? Now, we've looked at that. We've looked at those various scenarios, and that's the things I'll be happy to share with you to show you. It's not such an easy thing to do. It depends on the objectives. But one thing I would say is you cannot, to 90% of the population, over the copper network, use VDSL at those sorts of speeds for a low price. It's not possible.
Mr. Quigley, don't get me wrong. I'm not. I mean, this is a fairly significant point of strategic philosophy, if you like, the difference between our approach and what the government has been making. I'm not contending that fibre to the premises is bad or shouldn't be deployed, nor am I contending that fibre to the cabinet should be deployed universally. What I'm struggling with is that wherever I go, anywhere else in the world, countries, by and large, there's some exceptions, but most countries are using a mix of technologies. And as the gentleman at BT was saying to me just last week, we decide whether to go fibre to the prem, fibre to the cabinet, depending on what is most cost effective in the relevant location, and they use different technologies. And I guess what I was really asking Mr. Quinlivan is that, given that very high speeds can be delivered over what is unquestionably a much cheaper deployment, I was asking why the government isn't taking a more technology agnostic approach rather than the one size fits all. Now, the fact is that, as you know very well, because I was with your former employers in Paris at Alcatel, and talking to them about the very significant upgrades in VDSL technology just in very recent times, really in the last year. So the fact is that the technology landscape is changing. And given we are in these straitened times, I'm asking whether the government is reconsidering its approach so as to, without compromising the broadband objective, to be able to achieve it at lower cost. And I think Darryl Quinlivan's answer is no, we made a decision 2 years ago and we're not reviewing it.
That's what I understood.
The only thing I'd add to that, and Mr. Quigley's talked about some of the technical issues there, there's also some broader industry policy objectives, and I don't know what the comparable industry policy objective might be in those countries, but the government clearly had an objective here of integrating a structural separation process with achieving universal access to a broadband service. So it wasn't simply it's not simply an infrastructure project; it's also an economic reform program. So I think you've got to look at the combination of those things in various countries before you can make a valid comparison.
Well, I'm very happy to discuss that with you any time, Mr. Quinlivan. But all of those countries are very focused on promoting facilities-based competition. And are stunned that it would be government policy to take HFC out of the broadband mix.
There's China as well.
I might hand over to the Deputy Chair for some questions.
Thank you. I have to shortly excuse myself to go into the chamber, but before I do, can you answer why the government would want to spend money implementing an alternate strategy that leaves a third of the country with a inferior or no service at all compared to providing the service that the NBN would?
Well, I think I've made the point that the government made the decisions based on a combination of objectives, which included industry policy and universal access to broadband services, and has no no plans that I know of to revisit those decisions, and in fact I'm confident saying it has no plans to revisit those.
Isn't the purpose of the NBN is to address the problems we have currently across the country, and we've heard the member for Greenway already mentioned deficiencies in her electorate. I think every single one of us can talk about areas where there's no service at all or inferior service. I mean, isn't the whole purpose of NBN is to address that?
That's one of the main purposes, yes.
One last question just on the report that's been given, and I guess for the purpose of future reporting, I'm very interested, and I know we've had some discussion at previous meetings about communication strategies and the importance of communication strategies, managing public expectation. It isn't a case out there that people are saying, why are we doing this? People are saying, when can I have it, and can I have it now? I would be interested in future reports, just a little bit more detail about the communication strategy and what communication is occurring. Mr Quigley, you've already mentioned a meeting with the Flying Doctors Service, which is fantastic. And just like instead of broad statements, a bit more detail about the communication strategy in future reports I think would be really useful, because this is a big infrastructure project. It is going to take a fair bit of time, and consequently we are going to have to manage that communication strategy very well with the Australian people and business.
Taken on notice. And look, before I hand to Senator Xenophon, my ears pricked up when you mentioned the figure of 65%, when I just read a recent blog article about the move from first generation broadband to ADSL 2+. And left to commercial forces, it was exactly that figure of 65% gets covered, 35% gets left behind. With that in mind, and with now that this policy issue has been opened up, did NBN Co or the department ever actually cost what a rollout to 65% of the population would be as compared to a 93% rollout as per the statement of expectations? Because I understand it's exponential, the growth in the cost, if you're moving from upgrading 500 exchanges, which is related to 65%, to upgrading what I gather is 4,500 exchanges if you're trying to include all Australians. So obviously there's going to be a greater cost, but I was just wondering whether for the exercise of dealing with some of these policy arguments, that commercial argument can be put to bed, that commercial forces are going to do what we're trying to do here and build a monopoly utility like we've got for water and all sorts of other utilities. Was that exercise ever done?
Mike might have comments about the company's analysis, but the government commissioned the implementation study from McKinsey's, which was published 18 months ago. And you'll find in that a diagram which shows the cost profile for a fibre rollout, and if my memory serves me correctly, it's a relatively flat line until you get up towards 90%, and then it begins to climb. And then the move from 90 to 93%, which was taken in the government's response to the implementation study, was really about the relative cost between those 3% and the wireless services, which were the next increment of broadband service that was available. So there was a logic that got you to both 90 and then 93, but we'll send you the reference. But
I've seen that. So I was just wondering why then is there a difference between what happened when it was left to commercial forces with DSL, first generation DSL to ADSL 2+, got us to 65% coverage?
Yeah, that's just looking at the cost. If you were looking at it commercially, you're looking at what revenue can earn and a capacity to pay and so on, which is a...
Well, there's also cost. While it's a straight, relatively straight line, it tends upwards. Obviously, the first percentile is considerably cheaper than the last percentile, even in 90%. So it trends up. The issue that, in fact, if you try to grapple with, the first thing you have to do is decide what it is you're trying to supply to these people in that, if you like, from that 65% or so, for what you would sensibly do with a DSL type solution. The issue is it's very expensive to provide people with a DSL type solution, even in that last 30-odd%, which is why none of the commercial companies would do it. It's just very expensive. So you then look at what is the alternative. And if people then say the alternative's wireless, because these are more outlying areas, that simply doesn't work unless you're happy to have people having a 3G type experience where they simply can't afford to download much data at all. So if you try to do it with a fixed wireless solution, it ends up between about 90% downwards to 65% more expensive than doing a fibre to the prem solution. So then the only alternative you've got to say is, can you somehow do this with a fibre to the node? But the fibre to the node solution is very expensive because you need a huge number of nodes. And what's more, so if I can keep stressing, you can only do a fibre to the node solution if you have access to copper. So you've got to get that access to copper some way.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Xenophon.
Limited time, so I'll try and make the most of it. Can I just go to the issue of the procurement process for the NBN, and that at the end of March or early April this year, the NBN suspended a key tender process because none of the proposals had acceptable prices. Is that a fair premise?
I'd say the proposals in total were not what we considered value for money.
Sure.
Yep.
So therefore the process was suspended, the tender process was suspended?
Yes.
That's correct? Yes?
That's correct. We suspended the process. Yeah.
In terms of that process, what procurement process was there in place up to that point in time, and what has happened since then? So presumably there would have been a procurement process for that tender process that was suspended.
Yes, there was a procurement process which we ran. Our procurement function ran that process.
Right.
When we made the decision that we weren't going to get the answer we believed was value for money, we suspended that process and we started a new process.
Sure. Can I just go back a step? At what, presumably there would have been, in a tender process, you would normally have a few rounds in a tender process, is that right?
That's correct.
So at the point that you suspended the tender process, how many rounds had you gone through in that tender process?
Off the top, I have to take that one on notice. There
Sure.
were several. I don't remember the exact number.
Was
several
it
rounds.
3, 4, 5,
yes.
something like
number,
that?
Yes.
And presumably at each round of that tender process, as to what, in terms of what normally happens, it would have been a better price or a more acceptable price.
More acceptable package in total.
Package in total,
yes.
yeah, which would have included price.
Yes.
Okay. Was any consideration given to having some further rounds of that tender process, or did NBN Co feel that was the end of the line in terms of that procurement process?
There was a judgment made that we weren't going to get where we needed to be under that process.
And in terms of that process, where do you get the decision was obviously made at your level, presumably, and was there a procurement committee at that stage? What was the actual structure?
Yes, there's a committee which we have in place that looks at every one of these large procurements.
What's that committee called? You can take it on notice, but there is a specific...
notice. I think we use a 3-letter acronym, which I won't use here. So it's just another 3-letter acronym for that committee.
Okay, all right. Whatever that committee is, you can take that on notice. Is that the advice that committee gave you to say that's the end of that procurement process?
No, it wasn't quite that simple.
Right.
Obviously, this is a big cost for the company, one of the biggest costs for the company. So I was watching in the construction negotiations as they were taking place. I was updated regularly. I sit in on some of those committee meetings to get briefed. And I'd say it's fair to say that the management made a collective judgment in the end that we weren't going to get where we needed to be. We took that judgment to one of the committees of the board, the implementation committee, the committee of the board, to say, look, this is where we think we're up to, etc.
But can I just ask, the procurement committee, whatever it's called, there was a procurement committee that gave advice that was involved in that process. Did that committee say we should end this process and that we should start from scratch? Was that the advice of that committee at that time?
No, I wouldn't say the advice was we should end this process, start from scratch. There was advice to say, I think, that there was a general recognition in the committee and amongst the management of the company that this process we were under wasn't going to get where we believe we needed to get to.
I'm just trying to establish whether the committee that was charged with undertaking the tender process gave advice to you, to NBN senior management, that we should either continue with this process to have another round or two, or whether we should go to something else. Are you in a position to answer that?
No, I think I need to go back and have a look, because the process is one. It's not that simple of a committee working away, reaching a conclusion and bringing it to me. I was involved, as you would expect me to be, along the process, as were some of my senior management colleagues.
I'm just trying to establish whether the advice that NBN Co took to scrap that procurement process, that tender process, was advice that was in any way at odds or contrary to the actual committee that was charged with procuring it.
And I'll check the records here, but my belief is that the committee came to the conclusion, which of course we minute all these committee meetings, came to the conclusion that we needed to move into a new process.
Could I ask you, on notice, to provide to the committee those documents, and if there is any sensitivities there that could be, you could take advice on that?
There's almost certainly in those committee meeting notes some very sensitive commercial information.
But insofar as I'm just trying to establish to what extent did the procurement committee have a view about the procurement process being changed or scrapped at that time, those things, in terms of those threshold decisions, presumably they would not have been. That itself would not be commercially in confidence. Maybe the reasons for it may be, but in terms of what the procurement. So I'm just trying to be fair here in relation to that. Can I just then go very quickly, because of time constraints, to a couple more issues? Firstly, there is now a new procurement process in place. Is that right?
That's correct.
Where are we at with that? Because there was, I saw some commentary by independent analysts. Or by analysts such as David Kennedy, Kevin Morgan, Paul Buddha. Are you laughing there? I don't know. Well, I don't know. I'm not as familiar as you are with them, but they've been quoted in the media. So saying that they... Well, I'm just referring to media reports. So I'm not saying that their views are valid or not, but their criticism was that they couldn't see why that process was scrapped. But notwithstanding that, how close are we? Sorry?
Oh, I wonder how they would know. How Mr. Kevin Morgan would possibly know.
And I saw his piece in the Australian Daily, which I asked you, Bradfield, about, put some things on notice there.
Australian.
But he was, but
the coalition's line.
No, that's the hate media. That's the hate media, Doug, isn't it? Oh, we couldn't have the hate media.
Chair, I mentioned Kevin Morgan because I understand he served on Kim Beazley's Ministerial Committee on Telecom Reform and on behalf of the ACTU. So, I thought he had some credibility there. Perhaps on notice, could you advise where are we at in terms of the procurement process now? How close are you to delivering the outcomes that NBN Co wanted in terms of pricing and cost structures? And without going to detail now, can you? Is there some indication that you'll be getting there in the next month or two or 3 months, or what sort of time frame are you looking at because of that suspension that occurred of the tender process?
Well, first of all, I can say that we've got there in some areas, as we've already let a contract, announced another two, so we covered Queensland, New South Wales, ACT, Western Australia, Victoria. We're still working on Northern Territory and South Australia. What I can also tell the committee, we're not letting the fact that we haven't finalised contracts for South Australia and Northern Territory delay the work on the second release sites. We're doing that another way, and then we'll pick those up. So while we might start them a little late, we won't end them late. And I can already tell you that the contracts that we've let, we are convinced that we have reached the right deal for taxpayers. We weren't convinced in the previous process we were going to. We're convinced now.
And finally, if I may, Chair, again, Kevin Morgan, who the former Beazley, Kim Beazley's consultant, he asserted that in Tasmania, in Tasmania, well, that's raised in the article as well, the take-up rate is less than 15%. That's not right, is it?
If Mr. Morgan wants to take a trial and extrapolate the take-up rate, he's welcome to do so. Likewise, he's welcome to extrapolate the cost of a trial, divide by the number of premises and extrapolate that to 10 million. If that's what he wants to do, he's welcome to do it. He's wrong. But I understand
I'm
that's
just
what
trying
he's
to get an explanation because
it's frankly, if I can say so, Senator, it's a bit of a nonsense to take these very, very early numbers and extrapolate anything from them, especially in take-up. Yeah. The take-up is, we all know, the take-up is going to be a function of the deal that we've done with Telstra. That's the way it will work out.
So a fairer thing to say is that once it's been rolled out further, you can then get a better idea of...
Yes.
And that would be, what, in 6 or 12 months' time? When would we be able to get a better idea of take-up rates and costs?
We're already seeing, I think, in the mainland sites, we're seeing in places like Aldinga, Wollonga, that's in South Australia, the take-up rates, frankly...
I know
it's well above what we would have expected. And frankly, when we've had discussions with other telcos around the world about rolling out, they say, these are pretty high take-up rates.
If you would give on notice on that, particularly in Aldinga and Wollonga, those early take-up rates, that would be, I'd appreciate that.
Happy to do so.
And finally, again, Mr Morgan asserts that contractors, lawyers and IT contractors, 12 months to June, that there was $60 million spent on consultants and $42 million on legal costs. Could you, again, take that on notice, whether those figures are accurate and some basis for that? I'm just trying to deal with that.
We'll do that.
Before I hand to Senator Ludlam, this point of procurement, as I said in some opening questions, is something that the committee is starting to drill down a bit on, as you saw from Senator Xenophon's questions. So just really flag if there can be some good work done in those responses and some clarity between... clarity, as explicit and specific as you can be, because it's an area that the committee is looking at and wanting some detail on, and particularly in the comments, if you just might want to have a look at the transcript from today in regards to the response you gave to me in regards to procurement and some of the responses there. I think it might be at our end or it might be just language. There seems to be some differences in responses in regards to procurement policy and then construction contracts, and there might be some confusion at our end as to whether you're viewing those differently in the use of language. I'm not sure.
No, in negotiating construction contract, it's part of a procurement process, and our procurement policies will certainly cover those contracts.
Yeah, so if we can just line up what's being said to make sure there's clarity there. I'm not trying to pin anyone, but just so long as we're clear on the procurement policy and the overall direction that's been taken. Senator Ludlam.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a range of issues I want to cover, but I'll start with something, Mr Quigley, you mentioned in your opening statement that, I think it was you, you're appearing before 5 committees in the next couple of weeks. I can only make it add up to 2, this one and the Estimates Committee.
4 appearances in 5 weeks.
4 appearances in 5 weeks. Okay, what are the other 2?
Well, I was at, I think on the 20th of September, this committee. I'm at Senate Estimates next week.
Next week.
And then this committee again in October.
It's good that we're such nice people.
And I'm delighted to do so, I should say.
All right.
No, that's 4. 20th.
3 here plus estimates.
Senate's the next one.
3 here plus estimates. All right, thanks. Speaking of estimates, your 12-month rollout schedule, will that be ready in time for your appearance next week? Because it would be great to be able to go through that in a bit of detail.
That I'm not sure of. It depends on the date at which exact date we release that. So.
All right. Well, see, I don't have to say that the dog ate the homework.
It's not. No. We're making a public announcement about it, and obviously that it is quite it's quite an important piece of information we're getting out there in the public domain. So it's something we need to get right.
It'd be good for the public to be able to question it, though, so that would be a good opportunity at estimates.
Well, I think in any case you've got an assurance that it will be released publicly before the next meeting of this committee.
Sure. Are we going to get the kind of detail, thanks for what you've tabled this morning, these slides, where you got quite what look like reasonably fine-grained maps of the fibre and the wireless footprint. Is that what you're proposing to release next week for a larger number of sites?
It'll be that sort of granularity down to the suburb level. The difficulty we have, Senator, is it's, as I said, very difficult until you've done the design to know exactly which premises in an area are in the fibre footprint or not. And you can only do that when you get onto the ground and actually do the surveys. Yeah. Which is why what we're acutely conscious of not wanting to disappoint people, that they turn up in a map and then when we actually do the design, we find for some reason they're not. That's what we're trying to absolutely avoid that.
Yeah, but this stuff still gives us to a suburban resolution, if not street by street. So is it that kind of material that you'd be proposing?
I think what we can do, we can certainly say, not at a street by street level, but certainly at a suburban level of granularity, we would expect to be able to release.
Okay. When are you coming to Fremantle?
I wish I had $1 for every time I was asked that
I'll
question.
give you $1. That's probably really inappropriate.
Actually, I probably couldn't accept it. So.
No. You also mentioned that you'd be providing some answers on notice relating to the discussion we had previously about remote Aboriginal communities in Central Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been provided to this committee, or where's that going to pop up?
We've provided answers about the general services in remote areas of the satellite service and what it provides. So certainly in Aboriginal communities, remote Aboriginal communities who are being served by satellite, there is a fair amount of information there.
Well, we're trying to get a sense for what it would cost to provide some of these off-ramps. You've been discussing, I think, with Senator McDonald, a particular community in Queensland or some other places. How that would work where you've got settlements, Aboriginal communities, reasonably sparsely distributed across an enormous area, whether it's possible, and many of them are stitched together by this fibre. It's just that they're not going to have access to it, even though the service will run through there. Whether it would be possible to model the costs of putting a wireless tower, at least in each of those communities, on the way through.
Well, we could. The difficulty we have is we're getting many requests for people saying, both in the satellite footprint saying what will it cost for wireless, or what will it cost for fibre instead, or people in the wireless footprint what will it cost for fibre. These are not easy exercises to do, and they're all what-if questions, and each time we answer them we take up resources of the company that's not getting on with planning the actual rollout. And that's the difficulty we have, Senator. It's just to answer Senator McDonald's question was several person weeks' work had to go into that, because you've got to look at it, you've got to design it, you've got to plan it, you've got to cost it. It's not a trivial exercise. And I'm reluctant to keep trying to answer what-if questions that aren't related to the rollout, because when we do that, we simply slow up the rollout.
How is it not related to the rollout? I mean, sooner or later these services are going to be patched in one way or another. How is it unrelated?
Because if an area is clearly in the satellite footprint, and we have to then look at, well, what about if it was a wireless or a fibre? That's a kind of a what-if question. We wouldn't do that work because we know it's in the satellite footprint.
All right. I'm going to keep pestering you about this. Could I potentially ask you to take on notice in time for next estimates, just a yes or a no, whether you think it would be possible to set free the resources within the company to look at for that Central Australian cable that runs from WA right across the east coast through Central South Australia, stitches together a number of remote Aboriginal communities, many of which barely persisting with dial-up at the moment, what it would cost in terms of resources and your staff time to look at providing wireless, given that the backbone runs right through their backyards?
I mean, to do that is quite a substantial piece of work. So what I can try and do is give you an estimate next time at how much work that is to do that type of thing. I would also welcome the opportunity to convince you that the satellite service is going to be a very good service.
Great. But it's going to be a lot better than what they have at the moment. They are going to be using that service for things like video conferencing where latency will be an issue and that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to push the boundaries a little bit. But maybe we'll revisit this next week. To take up some of the issues Mr. Fletcher raised about voice services, at the moment you wouldn't substitute somebody's fixed line copper voice service for a VoIP service, or I wouldn't propose that we do that. The service is still a bit flaky, but I'm wondering at what point you would propose a seamless substitution for voice-only service with a VoIP, with an IP phone.
We're providing a service, and there's a terminal called an analog terminal adapter on the device, the network terminating device we put in the premises, that allows just a normal analog phone to plug in. That is, it's a simulation of the same service. I don't want to say it's not a VoIP service because it's using the same protocol. SIP, it's called Session Initiation Protocol. But it is equivalent to a analog type service. In other words, a stitched up link that doesn't rely on internet packets and the delays that you get with those. So we're providing that service over fibre. So it's the equivalent of a a circuit switch type existing telephone service. We will obviously, people can put VoIP on the general broadband internet service. What I can tell you is that the reactions we're getting from people to that kind of voice services is anything but flaky. They just can't believe it's a VoIP service. Over fibre.
At what minimum speed does that kind of service become indistinguishable from a regular landline?
For a regular landline, if you've got, and that's what we're providing, what's called in a committed information rate within the service, even a 12 meg service, we're providing about 100 kilobits per second of committed information rate, which can provide a very, very good telephone service on.
Even if someone's watching TV over the same wire?
We have these things we call priority classes, which is what you can do in this new type of network, so that you can in fact prioritise services that are very important, such as voice, where you have very low latencies. So you can make sure that packet delays and packet variations and jitter are very low.
Okay, I want to raise the issue of batteries, which has had a bit of press recently. Would you prefer it if that obligation to provide a battery backup in order to not have at least the voice services go out in a power cut? Would you rather that obligation wasn't on the company? Are you looking for something a bit more nuanced?
I think our obligation is to report back to the government the reaction we're getting from, in first release sites, the reaction from end users to the battery backup unit, which is quite negative. I can well understand the policy that the government has set of having battery backup, but I think there's also a recognition that less and less, a smaller and smaller percentage of people actually have a true analogue phone over the copper network that isn't cordless of some sort or isn't VoIP. So there is a decreasing percentage of people who today really have a voice service that is backed up from the exchange. So emulating that for 100% of the population, one could say, does that make sense? And it's a policy question. It's one that I think is active in the department looking at, and we are supplying information to the department on various costs and technical issues, and also on the reaction from people out there in the field to the battery backup unit.
I mean, you're just installing some anonymous equipment on the side of the house. Why would people be complaining in particular about the fact that there's a battery installed in there? Do they even know?
Yes, they know. It's not so much that there's a battery in there, it's the size of the unit. These days, a network terminating device is quite small. The battery backup unit is bigger than the actual active electronics. And often these are being installed internally. Increasingly, they're being installed internally.
Would you prefer a model in which customers could opt in to having a battery backup?
I think. Now, this is once again a personal view. It's not a policy view. I think an opt-out policy in which people say, "Look, I understand the issues, but don't bother. I don't want it." Or I've got a cordless phone. I'm never going to use it.
Can I throw to you, Mr. Quinlivan? Where's the government's head on that issue at the moment?
Well, as Mr. Quigley said, this is a live issue, so there are a range of options and views. The one thing that's essential in all of them is that people are able to make informed decisions whether you end up with an opt-in or opt-out model. The government's the current presumption is that the initial battery will be supplied, if requested, under any of these, whichever of the models we end up with, by NBN Co. But subsequent replacements would be done by the retail service provider.
Is that cost factored into the NBN's figures that have been?
Yes, it's part of the corporate plan.
We've got 5 minutes.
We've got to finish with Senator Ludlam, Mr. Hartsuka, and then yourself.
I won't be long. I'll leave the battery issue there. I do want to come to...
I want to come back to the battery issue, so...
Yeah. How long do we have, Chair?
We've got till 1 o'clock, so we've only got 10 more minutes. And...
We've got till 1 o'clock or 11?
11, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
No, it's gone. Yeah.
All right, so let's... Who's the Deputy Chair? Is that you?
It's Yvette.
You can take I might hand over to you, Senator Cameron, if you want to just keep running the lady.
That would be great. Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. All right, if time is short, I'll just wrap through these very quickly. In the financial summary that you've provided or that the government has made public that you provided some time ago. There's big discrepancies in your exec summary announced in that little table on page 16. You're about $45 million ahead of where you thought you'd be by now on OPEX, but you're $1 billion down on where you thought you'd be on capital. Do you want to just talk us through what that means?
In general terms, since we're short of time, in our OPEX we had to take on board a cost which wasn't in our original estimates, which is related to the greenfields. So we had to take on board all of the processing of the greenfields applications from developers, and we had to do that almost instantly from January. To do so, we had to contract that out to Telstra because they were the ones who were doing it up to that point. We took it on board, so there was a substantial part of that 45 million is to pay for that service, which we've now taken in-house. So we had a short-term contract with Telstra to do all of that processing up front.
That's 8 million?
No, that's not that. That was of the difference between our projection of OPEX and the actuals.
Okay, that's all accounted for by that one?
It's not all accounted for. There's been some other amounts, but that was the bulk of it.
All right.
And now, why is our CapEx lower? Our CapEx is lower for a number of reasons. We'd expected to get to a point where we'd put a deposit down on a satellite service. We haven't done that yet. And the other one is, of course, the rollout. That's where the bulk of the CapEx is spent on the fibre rollout, and we're a bit behind on that rollout.
Can we just talk about the delays? It seems to me there'd be three sources of delay for the reason why you're running behind. One is that this Parliament took a year longer than expected to pass your enabling legislation. One would be the Telstra deal has lagged substantially. And then one would be internal delays caused by miscalculations within the company or things slipping or whatnot.
Wouldn't completely agree with that. I'd say that the Greenfields decision had a substantial impact on the company, and the POI decision had a substantial impact on the company.
All right then. I just wondered then whether we can tease out how much of those three or four things you think would account for the slippage in the scheduling.
Most of those factors are by far the biggest factors in the rescheduling we have to do. Now, remember, in some areas, we've actually advancing things. So the fixed wireless, the priorities the government set us recently was to make sure that we put a considerable focus on regional Australia. So we put a lot of focus on the interim satellite, and we put a lot of focus on the fixed wireless, and we actually brought the fixed wireless service forward. And we're doing something we didn't even expect to do, which is the greenfields.
All right. I'll just skip through this quickly. Page 18. Can you tell us what the difference is between services and premises active? What's the terminology there? Because there's about 150 odd discrepancy in your Tassie rollout.
Sorry, you said page
18. Well, it's my 18.
Oh, God, it's your 18. I'm not sure.
Maybe it's your 3. Sorry, it's 18 in the committee doc. Page 3 on yours. Beg your pardon. It's under the heading Networks.
So premises ordered?
Yeah, services, premises ordered, premises active. What's the difference between a service and an active premise?
Okay, a premise active is a premise that has a service. That premise may have more than one service. In other words, it may have both a voice service and a broadband service, and we're counting that as two separate services. Okay. So the thing we focus on is the number of premises activated.
All right, and then it's up to the customer how many different RSPs they plug in.
Or whatever.
For whatever. Okay, great. Your page 7, you talk about a new outsourced contact call centre capability. Is that running out of Bangalore or somewhere? How far outsourced has that been?
Within Australia.
Okay. I am interested to know how that's going to work, given that you're a wholesale provider. Yeah. I wouldn't have expected... Is your call centre for dealing with calls from Ionet and Telstra or from somebody in a suburb?
We have had a very large number of calls coming in, and we're tracking all of this data now, and we do get calls from service providers, but by far and away the largest number are from end users.
All right. Now, how many of those are you having to refer and say that's iPrimus's problem, it's nothing to do with us?
We try and avoid making statements like that, Senator.
I'm sure.
Yes.
But there's a split in responsibility.
There is a split in responsibility, and what we're trying to do and develop processes with the RSPs is to have almost a seamless handover, and we log incoming queries, and we're trying to put in place a process whereby we close them off. We only close them off when the person who's had the query is satisfied it's been resolved. So we try and track that through, and we're trying to set that up with RSPs. We well understand what we do not want to get into is a situation where customers bounce back and forth between a wholesaler and a retailer.
Or you'll be hearing from ACAN. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, we're just about out of time, but just quickly, there's a reference to Kevin Morgan. There was a piece in the Australian Today referring to the cost per premises passed, and quite clearly early days, set-up costs and so on. With the latest round of rollouts, are you achieving that cost per premises passed yet that's indicated in the corporate plan? And if not, when do you expect to achieve that cost level?
Now, in the corporate plan, we have overall numbers. I cannot recall. In fact, I'd be surprised if you put a cost per premise.
Kevin Morgan refers to $2,300 per premise.
I don't know where he got that number. I'm frankly, that's the reason why I don't try to respond to Mr. Morgan's statements. Is I have no idea where he gets the numbers from. He just takes ratios and divides them.
Okay. Well, if I rephrase my question, are we currently able to install the fibre rollout at the price envisaged in the corporate plan?
We have as you would in any business, you have a trajectory when you're starting something new in which you're aiming towards a cost that you think is the right cost. The very first ones you do tend to be more expensive and you go down. So are we confident we're going to be able to meet the corporate plan targets at this stage? I say yes, we're still confident. We will update the corporate plan. There has been some moves and shifts, but overall, are we on plan? I'd say yes.
What is the current cost per premises passed currently being achieved in the latest round of rollouts?
I can't give you that number, Mr. Arsaker, and neither, even if I had that number in my head, could I give it to you, because it is a commercially quite sensitive number. We are negotiating and will continue to negotiate with construction contractors.
When obviously you'll get a point where you reach the lowest cost you're going to achieve on average throughout the project, or?
No, I wouldn't say we'll get to that point. Every business I've run before, I never stop cost reducing.
Okay. Well, when do you believe you will get to a cost per premises passed that will ensure that the rollout remains within budget?
I think we'll be updating.
When does the learning process end, basically?
The learning process never ends. We will continue to every year, right up until the last 6 months of the rollout, be focused on getting costs lower. That's the way I've always run a business. I think it will become clear to the government and to the committee as we continue to report both our financials and KPIs that we're meeting the corporate plan or not, meeting our overall corporate plan. Now, of course, the corporate plan itself has to evolve to take account of changes that take place. As I've said, such as focus on greenfields initially, those types of activities, we have to adjust the corporate plan for those.
Okay, but given Mr. Morgan's concerns that there is a very substantial difference, and given that probably...
I missed the beginning.
I said given Mr. Morgan's highlighted a very substantial difference, obviously in the committee, we have a concern that cost overruns will
You've got...
Can I finish? You've had a long time, Doug. I've got 3 minutes. We have a concern that this project needs to remain within budget. What assurances can you give the committee going forward as part of the KPIs that we are within the cost parameters?
I can only report the range of KPIs that have been agreed with the Finance Department, and there's a very large list of those KPIs, and clearly the Department of Finance will be focused on those, and they get a large amount of information.
Will you be able to report to us historically, which would be basically no longer commercial in confidence and no longer relating to contracts that you may let into the future, the cost per premises that passed in the rollout areas as you achieve them?
My job, Mr. Hardstaker, is to report to the government a range of parameters, which I will then do. It's up to the government to decide what information it releases to the committee.
Well, I would maintain that the cost per premises passed is a very important point, and also the cost to install to each premise is also a very important cost indicator that I would like to see reported on a regular basis as each rollout is conducted. A vitally important piece of information.
That's an issue for us to talk. We're going to talk about the performance reporting separately. Okay, thanks. And pleased to hear the Kaizen principle, the Japanese business principle in play about constant improvement and learning. Senator McDonald.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of very quick questions. With the batteries, Mr. Quigley, I didn't hear your answer. Are the batteries budgeted for in your costings?
Yes, they are.
Okay. And with the RSPs who'll supply the first down battery, are they aware of that and including that in their costings?
We provide the first battery.
Yes, the first down. I mean, once the first goes, Mr. Quinlivan said.
Yes, I think we've communicated that. Yes.
Do you know off the top of your head what the cost of a battery is?
Off the top of my head, I don't.
What, are you talking $100?
No, they're not.
$20?
Yes, I think more than that.
Okay. All right. Mr. Quinlivan, the government's still considering whether battery backup will be there or not.
Well, considering the model that will be applied, I think it's clear there will be some form of battery backup available for people who want it. It's just a question of what the model is and the decision-making process that's at issue.
Okay. I remember this was raised quite at length in the very first NBN committee of the Senate more than a year ago. I'm surprised that there isn't some conclusion. Look, just very quickly on a couple of other things. Someone told me out west the other day, and I didn't pick this up, and I hope it's right, but I don't think so. Someone told me that you were actually going to connect Julia Creek fibre to the home. Is that correct? No. Okay. I didn't think it was, but someone told me they'd heard it. I was hoping it might be.
Just glanced.
Yeah. Okay. Look, just going back to the question Senator Xenophon asked about the tender process. When the process was actually stopped, did you at that stage have an alternative strategy in hand? Did you know what you were going to do once you stopped the process that was in train?
Well, certainly we didn't stop the process and not know what to do next. We obviously the committee discussed the options to the process we were on. And so yes, we had certainly a view of what the way forward would be.
And the final decision was made by, I think you said, a committee of the board.
Yeah.
Which would have discussed your recommendation?
Certainly, yes.
Your recommendation?
Well, the company's recommendation. I speak on behalf of the company to the board.
Well, you were saying that there was a committee set up and then it went to the management committee. Who's the management committee?
No. There's a committee. There's a committee which, when I say this is a management, in the end, a management decision. There's various members of the management on the committee that looks at various procurement activities. So I'd have to check the record in terms of members of what. But certainly, what I can say is the company, in the end, made a judgment that it was better for taxpayers, better value for taxpayers to suspend the process and move into a new one. And we sought advice on that, expert advice, before doing so, and obviously we took that to the board for their ratification.
Well, now, not by name, because it's not of interest, but which group of people, if it was a group, or what level of person was actually doing the negotiations in relation to the first round, second round, third round?
Well, certainly the head of procurement.
Head of procurement.
Head of procurement. Head of procurement has a prime responsibility in this regard. For all procurement, the head of procurement has prime responsibility. And he reports to the head of corporate services.
Okay. I think those questions are on notice, that we'll get some information back on that procurement. Senator Xenophon asked.
Well, here when Senator Xenophon was, I didn't think he asked the same question.
Okay.
But finally, did that same group of people or that person continue with the new tender process?
Certainly, the head of procurement would have been involved in the ongoing tender process. Yes.
And the same team?
Oh, I can't tell you whether it's exactly the same team, but it would have certainly had some individuals who were the same.
Okay. And have you had any repercussions from any of the people who were involved in the tender, the tenderers who were involved in that first tender? I mean, has anyone threatened to sue you? Or?
No, they have. I've had various calls saying they'd very much like to, expressing their interest in participating in the next round and how supportive they are of getting this job done.
Okay. So no suggestions of breach of either contract or faith or...
No.
Okay. All right. Okay, thanks, Mr Chair.
Conscious that there wasn't more time, we're juggling a lot of members with a lot of interest. And thank you as well for running over time. Thank you for attending to assist the committee. Hang on. If you've been asked to provide additional information, and there has been, could you please forward it to the Secretariat, ideally by the 20th of October. I know next week's a busy week for you as an organisation, but that would assist us with our reporting. If the committee has any further questions as well, they will send them in writing through the Secretariat. Is it the wish of the committee to authorise for publication, including publication on the parliamentary database, the proof of the transcript of evidence given before it at the public hearing today? There being no objection, so resolved. I'd like to thank colleagues and all witnesses for their time today and declare this public hearing closed. Thank you very much.